You know, we're fundamentally social creatures. Our brains are literally wired for connection. It's how we understand ourselves and the world. But what happens when that connection is just completely taken away? What does total forced isolation actually do to the human mind? Well, let's get into it.
Okay, so first things first, we need to make a really crucial distinction here. There's a world of difference between choosing to be alone and having isolation forced on you. One can be amazing and restorative. The other, well, it can be incredibly damaging.
And the difference is just stark. When we choose to be alone, it's often calming. It reduces stress because we're in control. We know it has an endpoint. But forced isolation, especially when it's indefinite, that becomes a source of chronic, really damaging stress. That lack of control, that is everything.
This brings us to the big question, right? What is the step-by-step process that actually unfolds inside your brain when it's locked away from the world?
So when someone is involuntarily isolated for days, or weeks, or even years, their body and their brain go through a predictable and frankly an alarming series of changes.
To really get what breaks down, we first have to understand a core function of just being around people. It's called social reality testing. It's basically our mental sounding board. Think about it. We're constantly checking our thoughts and perceptions against other people's to stay grounded and rational. Without that, our whole sense of self can start to unravel.
And what happens next is this devastating cascade effect. First, all that uncertainty and fear cause stress hormones to just spike. Without anyone to talk to, that crucial reality testing fails. This makes the limbic system, the brain's ancient fear and anxiety center, go into overdrive. And here's the kicker. In a stunning physical change, the prefrontal cortex, which is our hub for reasoning and self-control, can actually begin to shrink. It's like the CEO of your brain just went on a permanent vacation, leaving only the panic button. The brain's entire balance shifts from rational thought to just raw emotional impulse.
And this physical change in the brain, well, it has severe psychological consequences. Thoughts become disorganized. Obsession, deep depression, and paranoia can set in. The mind gets so desperate for stimulus that it might even create its own reality through vivid hallucinations and fantasies. And tragically, suicidal thoughts become incredibly common.
And the damage isn't just in the mind. The body bears the burden of all this chronic stress. We're talking symptoms from heart palpitations and chronic headaches to severe sleep disruption and major digestive issues. The entire system is just in crisis.
So how did a practice with such severe consequences get so widespread? Well, its history is full of contradictions. It actually began, ironically enough, as an idea for rehabilitation, before it morphed into what many now consider a tool of torment.
Way back in the late 1700s, Quakers in the U.S. introduced it as a humane alternative to things like whipping. They hoped that isolation would lead to penitence. In fact, that's where the word penitentiary comes from. But by 1842, it was already getting some really harsh criticism. Its use declined, but then it saw this massive resurgence in the 1980s with tough on crime laws and prison overcrowding, which pretty much brings us to the situation we have today.
And that early criticism was so sharp. After visiting an American prison, the author Charles Dickens wrote that the practice was a slow and daily tampering with the mysteries of the brain, and he called it immeasurably worse than any torture of the body. That's a warning from nearly 200 years ago that described exactly what modern science has now confirmed.
So, this brings us to the modern reality. For the people who endure solitary confinement, the psychological damage doesn't just vanish when they're released. The scars are deep, and they are lasting.
The scale is just immense. In 2019, over 120,000 people were being held in these conditions in the United States alone. So this isn't some rare or exceptional practice. It's a widespread institutional reality.
So what does that actually look like? Well, it means spending 22 to 24 hours a day locked in a cell, often with no windows, that's about the size of a parking space, day after day, for weeks, months, or sometimes even years on end. Given its effects, it's really no surprise that the United Nations and many human rights organizations now consider prolonged, indefinite solitary confinement to be a form of torture. The long-term impact is measurable. People who have gone through solitary confinement are 3 times more likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder after their release than the general inmate population. They often report these lasting personality changes, intense social anxiety, and an inability to connect with others, even their own families, for the rest of their lives.
So if the practice is so damaging and its effectiveness is so questionable, the question has to be, is there a better way?
Let's compare a system that's focused on punishment with one that's focused on rehabilitation.
A really critical takeaway from decades of research is this: solitary confinement is completely counterproductive to the goal of rehabilitation. And even though it's used as a tool for control, studies show it doesn't even reduce overall violence within prisons.
The contrast between different prison philosophies is fascinating. In the US, the focus is largely on punishment and security. Now compare that to Norway, which focuses on rehabilitation. They spend 5 times more per inmate, but that money is an investment. It goes toward creating a humane environment, offering education, job training, and therapy, all designed to prepare people for life after release. And the result? Norway has one of the lowest recidivism rates. That's the rate at which people reoffend in the entire world.
The success of this model is pretty clear. Norway imprisons fewer people, to begin with, and far fewer of them ever return to prison after they get out. It's a system that suggests rehabilitation isn't just more humane, it's actually more effective at creating safer societies.
This leaves us with one final and really critical question. The science shows us that solitary confinement doesn't just punish, it actively damages the brain, unravels the personality, and gets in the way of the very possibility of rehabilitation. So we have to ask, if the goal of a justice system is to fix people, how does a practice that breaks the mind help achieve it?